Thanks very much, Keith. Well, I'm the guy who sweeps up after the Lord Mayor's horse. I wondered why I got the invitation. It was probably because I was very cheap. But actually, if I may, I think, we have had a fantastic day. And this last session, the sort of futurism section, I find absolutely fascinating and absorbing, not least because of the sort of potential that emerges from all three of our futurists, but also some of the challenges. To me, one of the great challenges, which we're seeing in London, but we're seeing replicated across the world as more and more of the world's population lives in cities, is the changing nature of work. How, for example, just to give you a very, very simple example, our standard product when I was first Minister of Transport for London was the travel card. Buy for 9, get 10, and all the weekends for free. It was a great offer. Hardly anybody buys that now. And they don't because actually they don't necessarily come to the office 5 days a week. They're very sensibly avoiding home working. Home working is appallingly unattractive. You generally end up either killing the kids or, and there was a Dutch study I remember which said that actually home workers make more trips than commuters because, first you go out to the post office for a piece of paper and then you go back to the post office to buy a pencil. You get the drift. But flexible working, something that is now defined as working on the pause, the idea that you work as you have a cup of coffee, you work on a train, you work in the airport lounge, you work in so many different places, you're just as productive, means that we're now seeing very, very different patterns emerging. And if you tie that in with the new definition of commercial office space, which has been redefined by companies like WeWork, we're probably saying goodbye to the conventional office itself. So actually, whether or not it's hand-built or built entirely without human hand, I suspect the irony is that the kind of buildings that we currently construct, we simply won't be constructing in 50 years' time. And all of that's fantastically exciting, but today, as Keith said, is about the formal launch, if you like, of Transport for the Southeast, an interest that many of us in here have, and some of us, certainly in my case, will be long dead before any of the stuff that our last panelists have even talked about. So, please, bear with me. Actually, as the co-chair with Tessa Jowl of the Gatwick Growth Board, our interest is looking at what happens in steady state business as usual between now and, let's say, 2025, when nobody will have a new runway. But, for example, in Gatwick's case, the volume of passengers will go up from something like 45 million, which it is today, to closer to 52 million. It's going to create an extra 13,000 jobs. It's going to raise an additional 1.6 billion GDP on top of the over 5 billion that we currently generate. All of that sounds very good, except for questions like, where will the people who will want to be employed at the airport live? If many airport-related jobs, and this is something that our colleagues in Southampton, David will understand, many of these jobs are relatively low-paid jobs. They're in food and beverage, in security, in baggage handling. If, for example, we wanted to get people to come from Croydon to work in Gatwick, well, let's put it this way. They'd be working until 10 o'clock in the morning before they'd actually paid for their travel to and from. So what does that mean? Well, it means that there we're just as interested in the planning policies of the local authorities in the region in terms of housing, in terms of providing the means by which the economy itself can continue to be generated, but of course in the process also ensuring, as Keith mentioned in his opening remarks, the continued rebirth of communities. And that's something that is a national issue, it's an international issue. Communities are constantly regenerating themselves. Actually, in terms of the projects that we care about, they're pretty obvious. I think many of us in this room knew before we came here what the broad strategic outline of TFSE would look like. In our case, for example, we're very concerned about the A23, M23, about the A27, about the A2, of course, because I think that point, A2, M2, about access of goods before or after. I think Brexit is irrelevant in this context. It's all about just simply getting goods out of the port and into the rest of the country. It's extraordinary, as far as I'm concerned, that 20-odd years after I left the department, we're still dealing with that incredibly substandard infrastructure leading to arguably the country's most important port. From Gatwick's point of view, we're very interested in the Brighton Main Line. We're obviously keen to work with Network Rail to invest ourselves alongside Network Rail in the improvement of the station, which at the moment is pretty appalling. But is also used by 1 million people who don't actually work or use the airport. They're simply using it as their start point for a journey to London. Wimble Bridge, many of you will know, is a really significant project which was identified by our colleague from Network Rail as being an opportunity to open up capacity in Croydon. Wimble Bridge, however, is between, I would say these days, 1.5 and 2 billion to deliver. And therefore not quite on anybody's horizon in the way that I believe it should be. I could go on. I could add to a whole list. What that draws, I'm afraid, an inevitable conclusion to is that whilst we can plan, and as somebody mentioned earlier, many of these plans have been around for a very long time, don't need an awful lot of change. The priorities, I suspect, if we wrote this plan 10 years ago, would be broadly the same, is the lack of investment that this country has traditionally made in infrastructure. When I was fighting the Treasury to get the money to build the Jubilee Line extension, I well remember them saying to me, but Minister, it goes nowhere. It goes to Surrey Quays. Surrey Canal, I think, was what they mentioned. It's not in Surrey, and there's no canal. It's pretty impressive. The Greenwich Peninsula, it's a contaminated coaling site. Nobody's ever going to live there. Or 15,000 homes, I think, Night Dragon are building on that very site as we speak. But, that kind of approach was anathema to building decent infrastructure. Now, thankfully, there is a genuine sense, politically, that that's changing. That there was a recognition, ironically, from the editor of the Evening Standard, whose name I forget, but who, well, I have to forget because otherwise I expectorate, who actually did sense, as part of the reaction to the banking crisis, how we re-energized the economy, that actually infrastructure not only created fairly considerable amounts of employment, but did actually add to the physical, economic and social welfare of the economy of the country. And indeed, we've seen some very, very welcome developments. HS2 is all about spreading wealth. We talked earlier, a very interesting session about, for example, the idea of inclusive infrastructure. So not just benefiting the millionaire investor, but actually there for everyone. Well, HS2 is there in order to make it possible for people in that 10 million conurbation that stretches from Liverpool to Hull to actually participate in this greater economic wealth that is currently vested in London in particular and the Southeast in general. And combined with these northern rail links, which Transport for the North, now with its statutory underpinning, will deliver, is potentially absolutely transformative of the nature of inequality in this country, which I think personally is the biggest single problem that this country faces. And I just wanted to draw one other proposition from this. When John Major asked me to be a minister in the Department of Transport with a specific responsibility for all of London, this was pretty unique, but it was based on the fact that absent a strategic plan for a region, London being defined as a region, we would never be able to either assess the priorities for growth or to deliver. My contribution to that was the Jubilee Line extension and the preservation of the Elizabeth Line concept, Crossrail as it was then known. Future governments, thankfully, completed both. And it's great that we'll see the Elizabeth line opening at the end of this year and early 2019. But one of the propositions that was frequently advanced about London was that it was wealthy. Well, it is wealthy. If you draw a line roughly north-south through Waterloo Bridge, the western half has 400% of national average per capita GDP. But east of that line, it's only 75% of national average per capita GDP. In other words, it's wealthy, but it also happens to contain 6 of the poorest boroughs in Britain. Actually, I think the problem that the southeast has faced generically is the assumption that it's wealthy. And in many parts, it is. But that masks real deprivation. The kind of deprivation that real infrastructure investment is specifically designed to alleviate and hopefully to eliminate. It's connecting communities. When you can get the people without jobs to the jobs without people, you have genuinely improved the health of society generally, and you've set a platform for future generations. And that, to me, is the real underpinning of Transport for the Southeast, because you just know that inside the Treasury, the assumption will be, because it has been for generations, well, the Southeast will be okay. It's wealthy enough. People only go there to die. You know, they don't want jobs, for goodness sake. They've all had them. They're living on their pensions. They certainly don't want homes. They didn't buy a house in order not to be able to see to the end of the field. You know, it's wealthy, go away, please don't build anything here. A bit like they used to say about East Anglia, you know, the reason why those of us who were at a serious university in Oxfordshire used to say that there were 2 motorways to Oxford before there was one to Cambridge. That was largely because around Cambridge, in that part of East Anglia, the local members of Parliament always said, please go away, we'd rather you didn't come. We really don't want you here. You know, Grockles, please stay away. We like it just as it is. Well, in the southeast, we have to define where income inequality exists. We have to have a strategy that addresses that income inequality and that in the process provides real vitality, real life for a community that's got to grow, exactly as Keith said in his opening remarks, through the latter part, through the rest of this century and on into the next. So it's a fantastic opportunity, I think, to do real good. And rather as Keith did, I just wanted to end by repeating Rupert's remarks right at the beginning, which I think are the clincher with the Treasury, with the government generally, and with governments and treasuries to come. And that is that when you're thinking about investing in Transport for the Southeast, yes, you're investing for its local people. Yes, you're investing for the sake of those who don't currently enjoy the privilege of living in this wonderful part of the world, but will be enabled to do so. Yes, you're investing in the greater economic health of the region, but you're also investing in the crucial economic survival of the rest of the country. Because the unique feature of this region is that both in terms of international connectivity by air and by sea, in terms of goods and in terms of skills and in terms of our crucial exports, intelligence, financial services, legal services and others, this region is the absolute key to the door. And without it, the United Kingdom as a whole will be incomparably worse off. So I'd just like to add my thanks to almost everybody except Anthony, who's the most appalling timekeeper, but wonderfully interested and interesting, and actually we forgive you, Anthony. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's been a great day. We've all, I think, hugely enjoyed it. All of you have a safe journey home. Thank you.